Some rivalries define your teenage years, pushing you to be better, sharper, more ruthless than you ever thought possible. But what happens when your greatest competitor simply vanishes without a trace? This is the story of Vanessa Chin, my high school nemesis, whose mysterious disappearance 15 years ago still haunts me, and how I finally discovered the chilling truth about what really happened to her. The setup: a rivalry forged in fire. Jefferson High School in Westfield, Massachusetts, was the kind of place where academic achievement was everything. With only 400 students and a reputation for sending graduates to Ivy League schools, the competition was absolutely ruthless. I was determined to be valedictorian, to get into Harvard, to prove that a scholarship kid from the wrong side of town could beat the wealthy legacy students who seemed to have everything handed to them. And then there was Vanessa Chin. Vanessa transferred to Jefferson during our sophomore year when her family moved from California. She was everything I despised: effortlessly brilliant, naturally charismatic, and wealthy enough that she never had to work a part-time job or worry about college application fees. She had this infuriating way of making the hardest concepts look simple, of raising her hand with the perfect answer while the rest of us were still processing the question. Our rivalry ignited during AP Chemistry with Mr. Rodriguez. I'd been the top student in every science class since freshman year, but Vanessa waltzed in and immediately started outperforming me on every quiz and lab report. The first time she scored higher than me on an exam, 98% to my 94%, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about grades anymore. This was war. The competition escalated quickly and became embarrassingly petty. When Vanessa joined the debate team and immediately became their star performer, I spent every weekend researching arguments and practicing rebuttals until I could match her point for point. When she started a tutoring program that made her popular with underclassmen, I launched my own tutoring service and offered it for free, just to undercut her influence. The intensity reached its peak during our junior year science fair. I'd been working on a project involving water purification systems since freshman year, constantly refining and improving it. But Vanessa showed up with this incredible genetic analysis project that looked like something from a graduate-level research lab. She'd somehow gotten permission to use equipment at UMass Amherst and had produced results that were genuinely groundbreaking. I still remember standing next to my carefully constructed display, watching the judges spend 20 minutes at Vanessa's table, asking detailed questions and taking notes. When they announced her as the winner and the regional representative for the state competition, I felt something ugly and desperate rise in my chest. "Congratulations," I said when I found her packing up her materials. "Your parents' connections at the university must have made this so much easier." She looked at me with this expression of genuine hurt that I immediately regretted. I spent 8 months teaching myself advanced genetics, Alex. I earned every moment of access to that lab, but I was too proud and too bitter to apologize. Instead, I doubled down on the competition, studying harder, joining more clubs, and pushing myself to maintain a perfect GPA while working 15 hours a week at the local grocery store. The truth was, my feelings about Vanessa were incredibly complicated. I hated her success and her apparent ease with everything that required tremendous effort from me. But I also respected her intelligence and secretly admired her confidence. She never seemed rattled by failure or criticism, never appeared to be trying as hard as she actually was. Part of me wanted to beat her, but part of me wanted to be her. Our senior year was supposed to be the culmination of our rivalry. We were ranked first and second in the class, with Vanessa holding the top spot by 0.03 grade points, and we'd both been accepted to competitive colleges. I was heading to MIT, while Vanessa had chosen Stanford. It felt like a natural conclusion to our 3-year battle. But then, 2 weeks before graduation, Vanessa Chin disappeared. The unsettling silence, the disappearance. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in May 2009. Vanessa hadn't shown up for our AP Literature final exam, which was completely unlike her. She'd never missed a test, never even been late to class. Mrs. Peterson waited 15 minutes before starting the exam, clearly concerned about her star student's absence. "Has anyone heard from Vanessa?" she asked, scanning the room. Several students shook their heads, but no one seemed particularly worried yet. Maybe she was sick or had a family emergency. But when Vanessa didn't show up for her other classes that day or the next, the concern became palpable. Her parents called the school Wednesday morning, frantically asking if anyone had seen their daughter. She'd left for school Monday morning as usual, carrying her backpack and wearing her favorite blue cardigan, but she'd never arrived at Jefferson High. By Wednesday afternoon, the police were involved. Officer Patricia Reeves interviewed students and teachers, trying to piece together Vanessa's final known movements. The last confirmed sighting was at 7:45 a.m. Monday morning, when Mrs. Gonzalez from the corner house saw Vanessa walking toward the school bus stop on Elm Street. But here's where the story gets strange. Vanessa never got on the bus. Driver testimony and security footage from nearby businesses showed that she simply never appeared at the stop. Somewhere between Mrs. Gonzalez's house and the bus stop, a distance of only 3 blocks, Vanessa Chin had vanished without a trace. The search effort was massive and immediate. Police dogs tracked her scent to the intersection of Elm and Maple Streets, where it mysteriously disappeared. Volunteers combed through Westfield Park, the wooded areas behind the school, and the abandoned buildings near the old textile mill. Local news stations ran her photograph constantly, and the FBI was consulted when the investigation crossed state lines. But there were no witnesses, no physical evidence, no digital trail. Vanessa's phone was found in her bedroom. She'd apparently forgotten it that morning. Her bank account showed no activity, her social media accounts went silent, and none of her friends or family received any communication from her. My initial reaction to Vanessa's disappearance was complicated and shameful. When I first heard she'd missed the literature exam, I felt a brief, ugly moment of satisfaction. Maybe she'd finally cracked under pressure. Maybe she'd make a mistake that would cost her the valedictorian spot I'd been chasing for 3 years. But as the hours turned into days and the severity of the situation became clear, that petty satisfaction transformed into something much more unsettling. I found myself unable to concentrate during my other final exams, constantly looking toward Vanessa's empty desk and wondering where she could be. The guilt was overwhelming. Had my competitive hostility contributed to whatever had happened? Had I made her feel so unwelcome and under attack that she'd felt the need to run away? I replayed every interaction we'd had, every snide comment I'd made, every time I'd undermined her achievements or questioned her methods. Graduation was a surreal, somber affair. They called Vanessa's name during the ceremony and left a moment of silence, but the absence felt enormous and wrong. I was named valedictorian by default, the achievement I'd wanted so desperately for 3 years, but it felt hollow and meaningless without Vanessa there to compete against. The lingering shadows, years of questions the impact of Vanessa's disappearance rippled through our entire graduating class and shaped our college experiences in ways I hadn't anticipated. Those of us who'd known her well found ourselves constantly checking missing person databases, following up on false sightings, and carrying this unresolved trauma that affected our ability to form new friendships and trust new people. I struggled through my freshman year at MIT, unable to shake the feeling that I was living a life that should have belonged to someone else. Every academic success felt tainted by the knowledge that my greatest competitor wasn't there to challenge me. I'd defined myself in opposition to Vanessa for so long that without her, I felt lost and unmotivated. Over the years, various theories and conspiracies circulated through our alumni network. Some people believed Vanessa had been kidnapped by human traffickers. There had been reports of suspicious vans in the area around the time of her disappearance. Others thought she'd been murdered by a serial killer, pointing to similar disappearances in neighboring states. The most persistent theory was that Vanessa had run away voluntarily, overwhelmed by the pressure to be perfect and desperate to escape her parents' expectations. This theory gained traction when investigators discovered that Vanessa had been researching colleges in Europe and had taken out several library books about starting over in foreign countries. But those of us who'd known Vanessa well couldn't accept the runaway theory. She was ambitious and competitive, but she wasn't unstable or desperate. She had concrete plans for her future, close relationships with her family, and every reason to believe she'd succeed at whatever she attempted. The case officially went cold after 2 years, though Vanessa's parents never stopped searching. They hired private investigators, consulted psychics, and maintained a website with updated information and pleas for help. Every few years, there would be a potential sighting, someone who looked like Vanessa in a coffee shop in Seattle, a woman with similar features working at a bookstore in Vermont, but none of them ever proved to be her. The psychological impact on those of us who'd known Vanessa was profound and lasting. I developed anxiety issues that persisted throughout college, constantly worried that people in my life could simply disappear without explanation. I had difficulty maintaining relationships because I was always braced for abandonment or betrayal. My academic performance suffered as well. Without Vanessa to compete against, I lost much of my motivation to excel. I graduated from MIT with decent grades, but I was nowhere near the top of my class. The rivalry that had defined my high school years had given me purpose and drive, and without it, I felt directionless and apathetic. I also became obsessed with true crime stories and missing person cases, always hoping to find some parallel or insight that might help solve Vanessa's disappearance. I read every book, watched every documentary, and followed every podcast about similar cases, looking for patterns or clues that law enforcement might have missed. The fateful encounter. A clue emerges. 15 years passed, and I'd built a reasonably successful life as a software engineer in Boston. I'd gotten married, bought a house, and mostly managed to put my high school trauma behind me. But Vanessa's disappearance remained this unsolved mystery that lived in the back of my mind, occasionally surfacing during sleepless nights or when I encountered news stories about other missing people. Then, in March 2024, I received a message on LinkedIn that changed everything. The message was from someone named Dr. Catherine Williams, who identified herself as a researcher at the University of Vermont studying long-term missing person cases. She was specifically interested in high-achieving students who disappeared during their senior year of high school, and she'd come across Vanessa's case in her research. I'm reaching out to former classmates and friends to see if anyone might be willing to participate in a research interview about the social and academic dynamics that might have contributed to these disappearances, she wrote. I've developed some theories about the pressure these students face and how it might relate to their decisions to disappear. The word decisions jumped out at me immediately. Dr. Williams was clearly operating under the assumption that Vanessa had chosen to disappear, rather than being a victim of foul play. This was the runaway theory that had never felt right to me, but coming from an academic researcher, it carried more weight than internet speculation. I agreed to participate in the research, partly out of curiosity and partly because I hoped it might finally provide some closure. Dr. Williams and I scheduled a video call for the following week, and I spent the intervening days thinking about what I might contribute to her research. But when I tried to find more information about Dr. Catherine Williams online, I hit several strange roadblocks. Her LinkedIn profile was fairly sparse, with no clear affiliation to the University of Vermont beyond her own claim. When I searched for her on the university's website and academic databases, I found no trace of her research or her position. More unsettling, when I called the University of Vermont's psychology department to verify her credentials, they had no record of anyone named Catherine Williams conducting research on missing persons. My suspicion grew when I received a follow-up message from Dr. Williams with very specific questions about Vanessa's personality, her family relationships, and the exact nature of our rivalry. The questions were too detailed and too personal for legitimate academic research, and they demonstrated knowledge about our high school dynamics that wouldn't be available in public records or news reports. Instead of participating in the scheduled interview, I decided to dig deeper into who Dr. Catherine Williams really was. Using reverse image searches and social media investigation techniques I'd learned from my true crime obsession, I discovered that the photograph on her LinkedIn profile belonged to a real Dr. Catherine Williams who worked at Johns Hopkins University and specialized in pediatric oncology. Someone was using a fake identity to gather information about Vanessa Chen's disappearance, and they'd specifically targeted me because of my known rivalry with her. The question was, why now, and what did they know that law enforcement hadn't discovered 15 years ago? The echoes of the past, unveiling the truth. My investigation into the fake Dr. Williams led me down a rabbit hole that ultimately revealed the chilling truth about Vanessa's disappearance. Using email tracing tools and social media analysis, I discovered that the fake LinkedIn profile had been created from an IP address in Burlington, Vermont, specifically from a coffee shop near the University of Vermont campus. But more importantly, the email account associated with the fake profile had been used to make several online purchases over the past few months, all shipped to a P.O. box in Burlington registered under the name V. Chen. The initials made my blood run cold. Could Vanessa be alive? Had she been living under an assumed identity in Vermont for the past 15 years? But if so, why was she reaching out now, and why use such an elaborate deception? I drove to Burlington that weekend, telling my husband I needed to visit an old college friend. The P.O. box was located in a commercial mailing service near the university, and through careful questioning, I learned that the box had been rented by a woman matching Vanessa's general description who paid in cash and rarely picked up her mail in person. The breakthrough came when I positioned myself across the street from the mailing service on a Monday afternoon and waited. After 3 hours, I saw her, a woman in her 30s with dark hair, wearing a heavy winter coat and sunglasses despite the mild weather. She moved quickly and kept her head down, but the walk was unmistakably Vanessa's, that efficient, purposeful stride I remembered from high school hallways. I followed her at a distance as she walked to a small apartment building 6 blocks away. When she disappeared inside, I waited until I was sure she wasn't coming back out, then approached the building's directory. Unit 4B was listed under V. Chen, close enough to her real name to feel familiar, but different enough to avoid detection. Instead of confronting her immediately, I spent the next week researching V. Chen and her life in Burlington. What I discovered was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Vanessa had been living in Vermont for the past 15 years under various assumed identities, working as a freelance translator and occasionally teaching ESL classes at the community college. She'd never completed her college education, never pursued the ambitious career plans she discussed in high school, and had apparently spent years struggling with anxiety and depression. Through social media posts and online records, I pieced together a story of someone who'd been running from something, or someone, for most of her adult life. There were references to therapy, to medication, to periods of isolation and financial instability. But the most shocking discovery came when I found court records showing that Vanessa had filed a restraining order in 2018 against her own father, Dr. James Chen. The filing alleged years of emotional abuse, controlling behavior, and threats related to her academic performance and career choices. The restraining order provided crucial context for Vanessa's disappearance. She hadn't been kidnapped or murdered. She'd been a 17-year-old girl who'd felt so trapped by her family's expectations and her father's abuse that disappearing seemed like her only option for survival. But that still didn't explain why she was reaching out now or why she'd chosen to contact me specifically. I finally confronted her on a Thursday evening, waiting outside her apartment building until she returned from work. When she saw me, her face went completely white, and for a moment I thought she might run. "Hello, Vanessa," I said quietly. She looked older than I'd expected, worn down in a way that suggested years of stress and uncertainty. But her eyes were still sharp and intelligent, still unmistakably the girl who'd been my greatest competitor. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You reached out to me first, remember? The fake Dr. Williams." She closed her eyes and sighed deeply. "I wasn't sure you'd figure it out. Part of me hoped you would, and part of me hoped you'd just ignore it." We sat on a bench in a small park near her apartment while she explained what had happened 15 years ago and why she'd contacted me now. The story she told was both tragic and infuriating, a testament to the damage that perfectionist parents can inflict on their children. Vanessa's father had become increasingly controlling and abusive throughout high school, demanding perfect grades, perfect test scores, and perfect behavior. Any failure or setback resulted in hours of screaming, threats to cut off financial support, and emotional manipulation designed to make Vanessa feel worthless and inadequate. The final breaking point came when Dr. Chen discovered that Vanessa had been accepted to Stanford with a partial scholarship rather than a full ride. In his mind, this was proof that she wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy of the sacrifices he'd made for her education. He told me I was a disappointment, that I'd embarrassed the family, that maybe I wasn't college material after all, Vanessa said, tears streaming down her face. He threatened to refuse to sign the financial aid forms, to sabotage my college plans, to make sure I never escaped his control. On the morning she disappeared, Vanessa had been walking to school as usual when she made a split-second decision that would define the rest of her life. Instead of getting on the bus, she walked to the Greyhound station, used her savings to buy a ticket to Boston, and started a new life with nothing but her backpack and the clothes she was wearing. I know it was selfish, she said. I know it hurt people, especially my mother. But I was 17 and terrified, and I couldn't see any other way out. For 15 years, Vanessa had been living in hiding, using false identities and avoiding any contact with her past. But recently, she'd started therapy and begun processing the trauma of her childhood and the guilt of her disappearance. My therapist suggested that reaching out to people from my past might help with the healing process, she explained. I wanted to know how my disappearance had affected the people I'd known, especially you. Why especially me? Because you were the only person who really saw me, who challenged me, who made me want to be better. Everyone else saw the perfect student, the obedient daughter, the scholarship success story. But you saw through all of that to the competitive, driven, sometimes ruthless person underneath. She'd contacted me using the fake identity because she was terrified of the consequences of revealing herself. She was still legally considered a missing person, and she wasn't sure how law enforcement or her family might react to learning she was alive. But she also desperately wanted to apologize for the disappearance, for the pain she'd caused, for the way her absence had affected our graduation and our shared memories of high school. I know you probably hate me, she said. I know I took away your moment of victory, your chance to beat me fairly. I'm sorry. The conversation lasted 3 hours, and by the end, we were both emotionally exhausted. Vanessa agreed to contact her mother. Her father had died of a heart attack in 2019, and to work with authorities to officially resolve her missing person case. 6 months later, Vanessa Chen officially returned from the dead. The media coverage was intense but brief, focusing on the reunification with her family rather than the abuse that had caused her disappearance. She enrolled in college at age 32, pursuing the education that had been interrupted 15 years earlier. We've stayed in touch, building a friendship that's based on mutual understanding rather than competition. The rivalry that defined our teenage years has been replaced by respect for each other's resilience and survival. Looking back, I realized that our high school competition was probably as damaging for Vanessa as it was motivating for me. The pressure to be perfect, to constantly outperform everyone around her, was part of the environment that made her home life unbearable and her father's abuse more effective. But I also understand now that some rivalries are necessary, that pushing each other to be better is part of how we discover our own capabilities and limits. The tragedy wasn't our competition. It was that Vanessa felt she had no safe space to be imperfect, to fail, to be human. The most important lesson I learned from Vanessa's disappearance and return is that we never really know what's happening in other people's lives, no matter how well we think we know them. The girl I'd seen as effortlessly perfect was actually struggling with abuse, anxiety, and a desperate desire to escape the expectations that were suffocating her. I also learned that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved by outside investigators or amateur detectives. Sometimes the only person who can provide answers is the one who disappeared, and they deserve the right to reveal those answers on their own terms and in their own time. Vanessa is thriving now, building the life she always deserved but was too afraid to pursue. She's studying social work, planning to help other young people who find themselves trapped by family expectations or abuse. Our rivalry pushed both of us to achieve more than we might have on our own, but her disappearance taught me that winning isn't worth anything if the people you care about aren't safe and healthy enough to compete. Have you ever wondered what happened to someone from your past who simply vanished from your life? What would you do if you discovered that a former rival or competitor had been living in hiding for years? And how do we balance the drive to succeed with the need to create safe spaces for the people we're competing against?